Guys, the Denver Nuggets finally have a general manager or general managers, however way you want to look at it. Doesn't really matter, right? Doesn't really matter. The Denver Nuggets have finally filled their front office void, and we now know who is going to be running the basketball operations and making all the key decisions to try to savor the Jokic window and maximize the amount of championships that man is getting. You cannot waste the best player in the world's prime, and the guys that are going to do it, are going to help the Nuggets do it at least, are going to be none other than Ben Tenzer and former Minnesota Timberwolves executive Jon Wallace are the franchise's new executive vice president of player personnel, as you can see per Shams Charania. So a little bit of background here. The Denver Nuggets, after they had fired Calvin Booth and head coach Michael Malone with 3 games left in the season, promoted Ben Tenzer to be the interim GM throughout their playoff run, and they promoted Dave Adelman to be the interim head coach. Well, they removed the interim label from Dave Adelman fairly quickly after the season. They were pretty confident with him. But they went through a general manager search before ultimately deciding that Ben Tenzer was going to be the executive vice president of basketball operations. And then they brought over Minnesota Timberwolves executive Jon Wallace to be the executive vice president of player personnel. A little bit confusing. Let's bring a little bit of clarity to the situation. What does that mean? All right. So essentially, it is going to be kind of a co-GM situation within the Denver Nuggets organization, and both of those gentlemen that we mentioned are going to report directly to the owner, Josh Kroenke, or at least the active owner. So here's kind of my thoughts. There's good and there's bad things about that. I like the fact that the owner is taking a little bit more accountability, similar to what we see with the Denver Broncos, right? Of always saying at the end of the day, they got to report to the owner. That's what they got to do. So the accountability is going to be there. You do want to see your owners involved in some capacity, at least to be there and, brainstorm or maybe break the tie or whatever there might be. The fact that there's 2 executives and 2 voices in the room can be a very positive thing and a very negative thing, right? So let's break it down through the positives really quickly first. So let me just look up something really quickly, because I want to make sure I get the name right more than anything. All right, I can't find it right now, but I will. So, yeah. Anyways, back to it. My bad, guys. The ADD is kicking in. All right, so I think the positive thing here is this: you've got somebody in Ben Tenzer who has been with the organization for a very long time, right? He seems to be very well respected within the organization, and by all accounts, what we're seeing around league circles. So, like I said, been with the team for a while. Jon Wallace, on the other hand, is somebody that was with the Nuggets previously, actually under the Tim Connolly regime. He was here. He ended up leaving Denver to go with Tim Connolly in a promotional role to be in Minnesota. So that in and of itself is a good thing. He kind of is known to be a rising star among league executives. And the fact that he spent the last several seasons in a different organization, I think it's a good thing. It allows for him to build up relationships with others and be able to kind of see how other organizations do it, what worked for him, what didn't, and just ultimately garner more experience. In addition to that, he's someone that seems to have a lot of really good relationships with players in the NBA. Like Jeff Green is one of them. They're constantly, writing each other on social media, and he kind of seems to be a little bit more of that, like he's cool with the players. So it's going to be interesting. I don't know what this is, but I don't know if Ben Tenzer's a little bit more well-versed on the current NBA player personnel side, and Ben Tenzer is more, adept to the college game and being able to kind of bring those two minds together, or if it's kind of a mix of the two. Regardless, the Nuggets did recently fire a high-level executive. I was trying to find his name, but I didn't have it. But anyways, this executive that's been with the team for a while, they let him walk. It was kind of a big story. People say he was pretty well respected among the league. My guess is it was around that time where they realized they like to keep Ben Tenzer, but Ben Tenzer maybe didn't have the best working relationship, or maybe he felt like there was somebody else, such as, Jon Wallace, that he's worked with previously in the past that he would have a better working relationship with, so they made it work. Now, here's another thing with this news story, and this actually made me feel a lot better about this entire situation. Down here, like I said, per Shams Charania, he said the Nuggets also interviewed Miami Heat Vice President of Player Personnel, Eric Amsler, and Golden State Warriors Director of Basketball Operations, Chuck Hayes, for their roles in their front office, sources said. Now, that makes me feel a little bit better because at least from a process standpoint, you feel like they went about it in a decent way. It wasn't like they just kind of had their minds made up and they were going to go interview other guys. However, what I think is very important to know that's omitted from here, or maybe we'll never be able to find out that information, is did those guys have interest in being the GM? Did we make them an offer, but they turned it down because they wanted more money? There's a lot of different speculation. I'm not going to speculate because I don't ultimately know. But it is nice to see, okay, they did kind of make it a wide search. My assumption is that they probably finalized this several days ago. A couple of things tell me that. Firstly, because they were, per a lot of reports, the Broncos, I'm going to say Broncos a lot on this channel. The Nuggets were very much in on the Kevin Durant trade. They were interested in it. They obviously just couldn't give nearly what the Rockets could give to the Suns for Kevin Durant. So that tells me somebody's facilitating that, obviously. And so that's kind of one hint. Another one is that a lot of the times NBA teams, for whatever reason, they just want to announce this news after the NBA championship. And obviously the OKC Thunder won it yesterday. So them announcing it today is not necessarily a surprise with the draft coming up in just a few days as well. They needed to get all that sorted out. So those are the big things. Now, here, you got a lot of people, in Denver that are big Nuggets fans that are saying this is kind of the cheap way out. They didn't want to pay their executives. You kind of look at the history, right? Tim Connolly, very successful GM, did a lot of really good things for this team. He was getting ready for a contract extension. They offered him one. He turned it down. He wanted a bigger contract. He ultimately goes to Minnesota. They said, fine. They promoted from within. Calvin Booth, he was an awful GM, but for whatever reason, they decided to offer him a contract extension. He wanted more money, so they were like, cool. No worries. You can play. You can be the GM for this next season. He ultimately ended up getting fired. So it's like you did the promotion from within thing after Connolly to Calvin Booth. And even though there's a couple things you can say Calvin Booth did well and the team did have success under his leadership, right? Ultimately winning an NBA championship, even though it wasn't really because of him. It didn't really fully work out. So they're doing it again by promoting Ben Tenzer, but I really do like the fact that they added another voice to the room. They're kind of making this a little bit more collaborative, right? Somebody that, they can bring different perspectives. They can have a clear vision. And obviously both of these men have experience with head coach Dave Adelman. So you would assume that they're going to have a good vision moving forward for the team. Now, here's the big thing. Are they experienced enough? I mean, did you really need to have an experienced executive? I've never been a big believer in that. I think that ultimately if somebody's, ready for the promotion, they can do it. And I think both of these guys are very much qualified to be in the roles that they're in. I think you can make the argument that they're both qualified to be NBA GMs on their own. So the fact that they're kind of co-managing it helps, takes a little bit of pressure off of them and allows for them to, like I said, get a little bit more done. I think if they have a good working relationship, it's going to be able to work out very well. I think the Cronkies are probably taking something a little bit out of the Broncos playbook when, how the Broncos new ownership group is doing. Now, for anybody that doesn't know, the Cronkies and the Walton Penner group are very close because there's a marriage within the two families. I forgot exactly how they're tied in, but they are. One of the Carrie Walton Penner, I think, or one of the daughters married one of the sons. That's how the tie is. Anyways, they're kind of taking this very similar approach, right? But basketball operations is different than football operations. In basketball, you don't see very often where a head coach also has a lot of personnel say. In football, it's a lot more common. So with the Broncos, they got Sean Payton. He is very much involved in like the draft and the free agents, but the ultimate decision maker is George Payton. But they collaboratively work together. And if there's anything that they need to, maybe there's two disagreements, the tiebreaker is the owner, Greg Penner. That's kind of how they're tying this in now. They've got an executive vice president of player personnel. They've got the executive vice president of pro personnel. I'm sorry, basketball operations. Both these guys, Ben Tenzer and Jon Wallace, working together, and then the tiebreaker is ultimately going to be Josh Kroenke, the guy that the people that they report to. So worked really well for the Broncos. We'll see if it's going to work out really well for the Nuggets. But the $1 million question is this: the Nuggets are in. You can make the argument that they're in a very bad position, but you can make the argument that they're in a very good position, depending on where you are, right? The bad position is that they don't have any draft picks, and they don't really have a lot of money to spend. And unless they can figure out a trade or figure out a way to get some of these contracts off the books, and the most likely ones are going to have to be like Dario Saric. Can somebody sign him away, right, after he picked up his player option? Zeke Naji taking up $8 million or whatever it is on the salary cap. Can they move him? I would love for them to move Michael Porter, but it's going to be a lot more difficult. But if you can figure out one of those or all of those contracts and be able to create some flexibility and bring some fresh guys in to be able to build out the bench, it's a win-win scenario. But that's going to be the bad. The good is they've got arguably the best starting five still in the NBA, and they have, without a doubt, by far and away, the best player in the world in Nikola Jokic. And he's able to, as you saw, with a team that suffered injuries in the playoffs, with Michael Porter Jr. and just completely inept play, and then a hamstring pull by Aaron Gordon, and a sickness going around, and a Jamal Murray that was sick. By himself, basically, Jokic was able to win the first round against the pretty underrated Clippers team and take the eventual defending champs to Game 7 in a series where you can make the argument that we gave it away, but also that we could have lost it in 5 or 6 games. Nonetheless, we're obviously, as currently constructed, still a very competitive team and still a championship contending team. But running it back with the same team and just hoping that, Julian Strawther's going to get better and Jalen Pickett's going to get better, and now you finally have De'Ron Holmes after he tore his ACL in Summer League last year, hope is never a strategy. That's what I always like to say. It would be a huge bonus, and it would be a massive benefit add Peyton Watson to that list. It'd be a massive benefit if those young guys can take another step and be more key contributors. However, that is not a plan. You've got to be able to build out this bench, and you've got to be able to bring in some guys that are better two-way players. But more importantly, you need to bring in some guys that can shoot the 3 ball. And that is what it is that we need. So there's a lot of work that this team's got to do. I think this is step 1 in getting there, in terms of at least getting the front office situation handled. Like I said, I did feel a lot better that they at least went out and they made this a process, because it's one of those things where if this ends up working out, let's say they didn't look anywhere else and they just made these hires and it ended up working out, the Cronkies are going to look like geniuses, but you just got lucky. That's what people don't understand. You've got to go through the proper process. You might not get it right, but as long as you go through the right process, I could always have respect for you as a fan when I'm looking at owners and executives making decisions. And if you ultimately, get this one right and you kind of went through the process in full, great news. So kudos to the Nuggets for getting this done finally. I think it took a little bit too much time, and we'll see what ends up ultimately coming out of this. I'd love to know what you guys' thoughts are below in the comments. And are there any players that you want to see this team specifically go out and target? Let me know below. Y'all have a wonderful day, man. Go Nuggets as always, and peace.